Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Mioch and you are watching A News. Let's have a look at the headlines. Iran says it's still in control of the Strait of Hormuz and isn't seeking peace talks with Trump, despite a pause in bombing. Zelensky arrives in the UK to meet new Prime Minister Andy Burnham and visit Ukrainian troops. And Southern Europe continues to burn. French president holds a crisis cabinet meeting as wildfires rage out of control. Thank you for tuning in. Iran says it is still in control of the Strait of Hormuz and is not seeking peace talks with the US, despite a pause in hostilities after nearly 2 weeks of strikes. Washington says it's halting attacks to boost diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. Tehran confirmed it would also observe the ceasefire, but added that reports it was seeking a peace deal were, quote, fabricated.
For the first time in 13 days, the Pentagon has halted its bombing campaign against Iran. United Nations Ambassador Mike Waltz confirmed the pause is for negotiations, reportedly timed to allow an Omani delegation in Tehran to discuss reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but the decision also reflects severe military constraints. Defense sources say top advisors, including Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane, warned the president that the US is exhausting pre-selected targets and draining critical air defenses across the Middle East. The numbers highlight this strain. The US has already fired more than 1,200 Patriot interceptors, each costing more than $4 million. This comes as the Defense Department updates its casualty statistics, reporting 642 US military casualties, including 18 deaths, since the large-scale operations began on the 28th of February. Tehran has reciprocated the pause, though officials insist their strategy remains attack for attack. Army spokesperson Mohammad Akraminia says the US failed its objectives and Iran remains fully prepared. Backing that claim, an IRGC commander says Iranian forces have already struck nearly 300 US targets regionally, allegedly destroying 11 aircraft at the Jordanian base. However, Tehran views the pause as a tactical delay. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghaei confirmed indirect messages via Qatar and Pakistan, but ruled out formal talks. He accused Washington of a third diplomatic betrayal over a 14-clause agreement, declaring Iran's sovereignty the absolute priority. Beyond Iran, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei says securing Lebanon is a prerequisite to end the wider war. Meanwhile, Israel and Lebanon prepare for US-brokered talks in Italy on August 4th to coordinate Israeli withdrawals.
Markets are reacting. Oil prices have continued to fall in global trading, sparking a rally in stock prices and government bonds. It follows 2 weeks of price spikes that have seen the cost of international benchmark Brent crude pass the $100 mark for the first time since May.
A pause in US and Iranian military strikes sent international crude oil prices plunging by more than 6% at the start of the new trading week. Brent crude fell to an intraday low of just under $90 a barrel on Sunday, while US benchmark West Texas Intermediate dropped to just above $83 a barrel as markets responded to the halt in military action. The decline extended into Asian trading on Monday, with both benchmark crude prices trading around 5% lower. According to media reports, US President Donald Trump ordered the US military not to carry out strikes on Iran on Friday, breaking a 13-day streak of consecutive US air attacks on Iranian targets. Iran confirmed on Sunday that it had halted its retaliatory attacks after the United States stopped its strikes over the previous 2 nights. Reports that Pakistan was pushing to restart US-Iran talks added to optimism that tensions in the Middle East could continue to ease.
In other news, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in the United Kingdom for talks with the new Prime Minister Andy Burnham. The pair are due to visit a naval base and meet the 200-plus Ukrainian military personnel and sailors undergoing training with British troops. Talks are expected to prioritize funding and technology, including drone deals and new electronic jammers in development. Burnham has pledged unwavering support for Ukraine and warned Russia that Britain will not back down until a, quote, long-lasting and just peace is achieved. Following his meeting with Burnham, Zelensky is also expected to travel to the United States for talks with U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday.
The United States of America and attack the administration.
Meanwhile, Ukraine says it wants delivery of a prototype of the European anti-ballistic missile system, codenamed Freya, by the middle of next year. Officials in Kyiv are seeking lower-cost alternatives to US-made Patriot weapons systems. Authorities say an international steering committee will soon begin estimating research and development costs. Allies are expected to contribute radars, sensors, and missile guidance technology, while Ukraine completes the system with the launcher and interceptor missile. Well, joining us now from Kyiv to talk on the latest developments surrounding the war in Ukraine is Yulia O'Connell, member of the Dignitas Fund. Welcome, Yulia. Thank you so much for joining us on A News. First off, what are your thoughts on Zelensky's visit to London as the first foreign leader to visit the country under new leadership?
Thank you for having me. I think their answer is very much that he's the first leader to visit England. England, it just means that the same course that England choose is going to continue. England provided Ukraine with $25 billion of assistance from 2022. $16 billion were in the military assistance, provided 350 defense missiles, and joint training has been happening through the whole this time. So it just shows that it's going to continue the same course, supporting Ukraine as it has been doing since the full-scale invasion.
Well, the week is going to continue strong for Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. He's set to meet Donald Trump tomorrow in Washington. What do you expect from that meeting?
Well, I think this meeting will be good for President Zelensky, for Ukraine. I'd like to bring up that Laura Luma, who is a big voice for MAGA, just have visited Kyiv. She might be still in Kyiv even. She turned her view on Ukraine, 180% or, opposite from everything she's said. She said that, and she was big and influential voice is MAGA and had a ear of President Trump. And she, visiting Ukraine, apologized directly to President Zelensky for calling Ukraine fascist state, for understanding that Russia, she actually said that Russian propaganda came into Russian propaganda worked on her, and she apologized for her views and for influence. So I think that her having again ear of President Trump and big influence in MAGA and speaking positively about Ukraine, understanding that Russia is the one who is an aggressor, who shares intelligence with Iran, who is establishing partnership with North Korea, and so on, is the enemy for United States, not the friend. So I think that's one of the piece of the puzzle that's going to make this meeting very positive. Another one is that United States spent over 1,000 missiles in Iran, and right now need also probably support from Ukraine in understanding how to scale up the production of anti-defense missiles like Patriot one fast and not very expensive. And Ukraine has a deep expertise how to scale up weapons right now on the cheap and at scale. So I think there is a lot of puzzles that partnerships are forming, real ones.
And Yulia, ahead of this meeting in Washington, we've seen reports, Reuters said that, quoting a Ukrainian security source, that Ukrainian and US officials have talked on a proposal to offer Russia an air ceasefire. Kremlin dismissed it as a speculation. If such a ceasefire is indeed offered, do you expect it to be accepted?
I would not expect it to be accepted. It's a great, actually, question. Great question, not only for the current situation, it's a great question for reflection. And if we compare this situation right now with the World War II and Hitler, who being compared, like Putin has been compared to Hitler multiple times, not only for the Russian to be a racist or fascist state, but for his behavior. In 1943, when the Stalingrad battle happened in back then in Soviet Union, and many generals told Hitler that continuing the war does not make sense. He didn't listen because he believed in German army. Moreover, in 1944, when Normandy allies joined the fight and German had to fight on both East and West front, and was already pretty obvious that Germany is losing, Hitler was convinced that he is winning this war. When in 1945, 70 kilometers from Berlin, Soviet army came that close. The war in Hitler's head was still that he is winning. And this analogy is really great to explain how Putin is thinking about this war. And therefore, in his head, he is winning this war. He's not going to accept ceasefire. He doesn't see a value in that. So that would be my answer.
Well, as Russia continues to pound Ukraine's cities, so does Ukraine. Russian energy facilities and supply lines. How effective would you say Kiev's long-range campaign has been so far?
Well, long-range campaign has been effective not only to deplete Russian funds, to Russian, financials to fund the war, but it really showed that striking Russia with a deep strike into Russian territory, Russian land, does not cause, as many believed, a nuclear response. I think that's one of the most important lessons that has been so far. I believe that if Western countries and United States really wanted to make Russia stop the war, they have resources for that. They need a will for that. The problem is why that will has not been put into place is because no one understands really what to do with disintegrated Russia. There's not enough conversation of what would happen if Russia lose, and that will cause Russia to be collapsed. So because the West doesn't fully understand what to do, who nuclear red button, who would control that button, the reaction is not as strong as could have been.
And Yulia, we're running out of time. I would just like to hear your thoughts on this briefly. What's the sentiment in Ukraine right now following those protests over the firing of the defense minister and the appointment of a new military chief?
The sentiment about appointing a new military chief, Mikhail Drapati, is excitement. The previous military chief served his, purpose in a war that has been happening up until now. The war changed so much that you need, and people came to the street because it's a democracy, for new leader. And Mikhail Drapati has a long history. He started the war in 2014, so it's a pretty much excitement about that appointment. For Mikhail Fedorov, yes, the streets are that people want him to be returned, but he put a system in place already. So the protests are not big enough to, at this point, to, make sure that Fedorov back in place. So whoever is going to be in place, Ukrainian society will look closely. And if it's a wrong person, the protest will happen.
Yulia, thank you so much for joining us from Kyiv and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Iran has strongly condemned Ukraine's deadly strike at a commercial ship in the Caspian Sea, calling it an illegitimate act of aggression. Tehran rejects Kyiv's claim linking the vessel to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Turash Iralilu reports from Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Iranian Foreign Ministry slammed Ukraine's attack on a cargo ship in the Caspian Sea, which claimed the life of one sailor and left several seamen wounded. A spokesman, Ismail Baghai, said Ukraine's move was illegitimate and contrary to the United Nations Charter and international accords. He added that other littoral states have also expressed their deep concern. He stressed to Kyiv that Iran will respond appropriately. Speaking at a weekly press conference on Monday, the Iranian official also urged the government of Bulgaria to reconsider its decision to allow U.S. military to use its airports. He said that Tehran has been aware of Sofia's role in supporting the U.S. military, warning that it will turn Bulgaria to an accomplice in the Israeli-U.S. war crimes. He was asked about London's agreement to allow U.S. B-1 bombers to launch attacks on Iran last week. Baghai said the new UK government is endangering the regional security. He said if the British government is concerned about the status of the Strait of Hormuz, it should understand that the waterway was open prior to the Israeli-US war on Iran. The Iranian official also confirmed that Tehran and Muscat at the weekend discussed how best to manage the strait, as both countries are on either side of the corridor. A spokesman Baghai also announced that the French ambassador to Tehran was summoned to the foreign ministry on Sunday to express Iran's strong protest over undiplomatic activities of its embassy staff. He also criticized Washington for what he called a double standard in dealing with Iran's civilian nuclear program after its deal with Saudi Arabia, stressing that Tehran will never forego its rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Turash Iralilu from Iran's Foreign Ministry for A News.
Staying in Iran, following talks in Tehran, Armenian Territorial Administration Minister David Khudatyan and Iran's Roads Minister Farzaneh Sadegh agreed to expand regional infrastructure. The two sides plan to turn Armenia into a transit corridor for Iranian natural gas and build a four-nation electricity grid linking Iran, Armenia, Georgia, and Russia. They're also discussing a second Araz River border bridge, a joint oil refinery, and a new hydroelectric plant. Turning now to southern Europe, where hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes as wildfires continue to rage in many areas. French President Emmanuel Macron has been holding a crisis meeting to discuss the response to the blazes, which are now edging toward the city of Bordeaux. In Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has visited Valencia, one of the areas worst affected.
More than 320,000 people have been evacuated to safety across France and Spain as fast-moving wildfires continue to ravage southern Europe. Extreme heat, strong winds and prolonged drought have fueled the flames. In southwestern France, more than 220,000 people have been forced to flee their homes after the Gironde wildfire scorched around 42,000 hectares and spread to within 15 kilometres of Bordeaux. Authorities say the blaze remains highly unpredictable, with shifting winds and dry conditions making containment efforts increasingly difficult. Around 2,500 firefighters supported by military personnel, helicopters and waterbombing aircraft have been deployed, while the European Union has sent additional aerial resources to assist. French President Emmanuel Macron convened a crisis cabinet meeting on Monday as another heat wave threatened to worsen conditions, with temperatures forecast to reach up to 40 degrees Celsius in parts of the country. Over in Spain, around 100,000 people have evacuated to safety from affected areas, including Madrid, Avila, Valencia and Castellón. Hundreds of firefighters, supported by international crews and aircraft provided through the European Union Civil Protection Mechanism, remain on the front lines as officials warn that the coming days will be critical. The emergency has also spread to Italy, where hundreds of tourists were evacuated from the Gargano Peninsula after flames swept through coastal woodland. Authorities across southern Europe remain on high alert as persistent, hot, dry weather continues to fuel the fires.
For more on the situation in the south of Europe, we turn to A News' William Denslow, who filed this report from an evacuation center in Bordeaux.
It was another difficult night here in the Gironde region. According to officials, a further 50,000 or so people being asked to evacuate their homes. That brings the total now closer to the 250,000 mark since the wildfire started to engulf this region here in southwest France. I'm here in an exhibition centre in Bordeaux, the largest centre of its kind for those that have been displaced because of the fire. It has the capacity to house around 10,000 people, and according to the cities of Bordeaux's mayor, around 5,000 to 6,000 people were here on Saturday. When it comes to the response, French President Emmanuel Macron says that the French people are standing shoulder to shoulder. We're seeing that not just when it comes to volunteers coming to sites like this to help people that have been forced to flee their homes, but also help for first responders, those tackling the blazes on the ground. A plane dumping a fire retardant has been deployed. That was in use on Saturday. We also know that the European Union is providing its assistance as well through helicopters, through planes capable of dropping water on the blazes as well. With difficult conditions, winds swirling, first responders say that this kind of outreach, this kind of support to assist crews on the ground is urgently needed as blazes continue to wreak havoc, both here in the region of Gironde in southwest France, but of course we're also seeing those wildfires forcing tens of thousands of people to be displaced in the region near Madrid, Spain as well. William Denslow, Frey News in Bordeaux, France.
All right, after a short break, we'll take a closer look at Kazakh president's appeal to Russia and Ukraine to freeze their conflict. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Back now to our coverage of events in Ukraine. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says freezing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine could create an opportunity to end the fighting. Speaking during talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Omsk, Tokayev said the two sides should return to negotiations under an updated version of the Istanbul framework. But he ruled out Kazakhstan acting as a mediator. Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has thanked Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev for urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the war. He shared his response in a post on X, describing it as a realistic, timely and wise message. He was referring to remarks Tokayev made on the 25th of July during talks with Vladimir Putin in Omsk. The Kazakh president said he had viewed it not as a civil war but as an interstate conflict from the very beginning. He also stressed that Kazakhstan respects the Ukrainian people, their culture and their language. Tokayev proposed considering a freeze in the conflict and the return to a renewed Istanbul formula. He said previous talks in Istanbul had produced significant results, and according to Tokayev, the next step could be a peace agreement backed by guarantees from the major powers. The Kazakh president also stressed that Kazakhstan does not intend to act as a mediator. He added that no one knows how to resolve the conflict because the parties continue to hold different positions. Tokayev described the freeze in the conflict as a mechanism that has been used in international practice before. However, the Kremlin rejected Tokayev's proposal. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that according to Putin, freezing the conflict was impossible given Ukraine's stance. He added that Moscow intends to achieve its stated objectives. Peskov also said the fighting could end before the end of the day if the Ukrainian side made what he described as the necessary decisions. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Well, joining us now to talk on what could follow Astana's message to Moscow and what it could mean for the dynamics in the broader region is Richard Spooner, member of the advisory board at the Caspian Policy Center. He's coming to us from Astana. Richard, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on A News. Let's start with the latest piece of news. Kazakhstan says it's restarted crude oil exports through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium as the CPC resumed operations in Russia's port of Novorossiysk. How much of a risk would you say that is, with Ukraine continuing to hit Russia's supply lines and energy facilities?
Of course, all areas that are close to the war zone are subject to a certain degree of risk, and Novorossiysk is close to the war zone. What I think is important to look at here is the issue of, when we talk about Russian facilities and Russian supply lines, and then we look at Novorossiysk. You know, there are two marine terminals in Novorossiysk. There's the CPC terminal, and there's the Sheskharis terminal. The Sheskharis terminal is owned and operated by Transneft, Russia's national oil transportation company. The Ukrainians have hit Sheskharis twice this year, in April and May. Hitting CPC tankers in the CPC terminal doesn't strike me necessarily as attacking Russian routes, facilities. That's why it seems like a curious connection being made here.
Tokayev has a few days ago urged Putin to freeze the war at an event in Omsk. Kremlin seems to have flatly rejected the proposal, although Kyiv said it appreciates the message. What are your thoughts on such a direct remark and why Tokayev has said it now?
I believe that President Tokayev, as in his administration, his government, and the great majority of the people in Kazakhstan wish very much that the war would end. And so the idea of freezing military operations could lead to that, and could at least temporarily stop what's going on, stop the deaths that are happening. You know, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine not so long ago were all part of the same country. And people in Kazakhstan are taking this war it's very hard for them to see it happening, very difficult. And so I think it's simply a sincere desire by President Tokayev to find some way to perhaps impact the situation so that the fighting stops.
We've heard another thing from the Kazakh president. He also said that the nature of the war is, quote, not entirely clear to many, including us. What can that signal when it comes to how Russia's neighbors and traditional partners perceive this conflict?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. It's a very interesting statement and one that needs to be thought about, examined. I mean, it reminds me of when President Tokayev went to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine and stressed that Kazakhstan would not be recognizing Lugansk or Donetsk republics because that was not in accordance with international law. So I think we have to look upon this as a veiled criticism of the war, if it's not clear, what its purpose is. And again, an attempt to perhaps, stimulate conversations that could lead to an end to hostilities. Although personally, I'm rather doubtful about the prospects for that.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us from Astana and sharing your thoughts.
My pleasure.
Let's now continue in the studio. I'm turning to A News Deputy Editor-in-Chief Orhan Amashov Orhan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me here in the studio. We've heard the messages from Kazakhstan. How has the sentiment changed across the Caspian region as this war rolled on, and what's driving the change?
Thank you, Andy. A number of things happening simultaneously. So we've seen the Ukraine basically attacking Iranian vessel in the Caspian, which was involved in the transport of Russian cargo, which effectively means that Ukraine effectively trying to attack Russia and its war economy. Iran's evaluation of that, because the Iranian vessel was attacked, was on the basis that Ukraine was doing it basically at the request of Israel. So effectively, we see the convergence of two conflicts in the Caspian region, and it means a lot. It will have certain implications, of course. It means that the South Caucasus is not isolated from these two theaters of war. But I think in the case of the Caspian, the Iranian vessel being attacked by Ukrainians, I think it's an extension of Russia-Ukraine conflict into the Caspian, not the extension of Iran conflict into Caspian, although there are others who would disagree with this evaluation. As long as the latest development related to CPC are concerned, the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, well, I agree with Richard on the basis that, bearing in mind the CPC is a 1,500 kilometer pipeline connecting Kazakhstan's western oil fields, including Tengiz, which is the most important one probably, with Novorossiysk port. Bearing in mind that although this pipeline goes through Russian territory, it's effectively being owned by a number of actors. Russia, as far as I remember, only in charge of the 24% of that. So basically, Russia owns only 24% of that pipeline, or consortium, which are effectively in charge of that pipeline. Bearing in mind that we talk about Kazakh oil, and bearing in mind that Kazakhstan plays an important role in Europe's energy security, providing 80% of Kazakhstan's oil exports go to Europe. And around, I think, 12% of oil imports of Europe comes from Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan being number 2. In that light, it doesn't look like something damaging Russia's war economy. So it's very interesting. There are two terminals, as Richard mentioned earlier. So I'm not entirely sure what Ukraine is doing is damaging Russia. But there's another point of view of which we should be very mindful. Basically, although Kazakh oil goes to Europe via Russia, although the pipeline itself is not completely owned by Russia, but only by 20% shares owned by Russia, still there's a sentiment that there's a need for diversification of routes. So basically, with Russia-based routes being not very secure, there may be need to use alternative routes. And alternative routes will be via the Caspian. I mean, only 5% of Kazakhstan's crude oil exports go via Caspian. BTC, Baku Tbilisi Ceyhan, plays an important role in that. I don't necessarily think that it will be possible to replace CPC anytime soon, but in terms of driving long-term change, removing or rather curbing and decreasing Russia's importance as a connectivity piece in the larger puzzle, this attack may be the beginning of something very long-term and extensive and incredibly consequential.
And Orhan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on one other thing. Obviously, Ukraine is continuing with its pressure both on Russia and other energy facilities connected with Russia. There was a Reuters report saying ahead of the Zelensky-Trump meeting tomorrow that air ceasefire is a topic that the Ukrainians and Americans might propose that to Russia. With this fuel supply disruption in Russia and in the wider region, do you see Moscow as being receptive to such an offer?
I very much doubt Moscow will be receptive to such a proposal, because Moscow seems to be interested in the continuation of the current state of affairs. I don't necessarily think Ukraine will be interested in that, because Ukraine has been massively benefiting from drone and missile attacks by targeting Russia's war economy and also making sure that Russia's confidence is being shattered in the eyes of the international community. But I think the meeting will take place on Thursday. Proposal could be made, but I don't think anything consequential or tangible will emanate from it. Number of things happening simultaneously. When the war in Ukraine started back in February 2022, a number of countries benefited from that moment because basically from the perspective of Azerbaijan, of course, it was a moment to enhance the credibility of Middle Corridor. So Russia is no longer reliable, Russia is no longer a credible source of energy, supplies, and basically it gives credence to other projects. So also Kazakhstan might have benefited from that as well. But now we see that Ukraine's efforts to undermine Russia's war economy also targeting Kazakh oil. This means that many actors simultaneously are interested in some form of freezing of the conflict, which could lead to the potential end of fighting at large. And we see in that fashion, we heard from President Aliyev during the Shusha Global Media Forum, where he basically said that this war should end. It's not within the best interest of any of the actors. Kazakhstan made an offer that the March 2022 Istanbul agreements, which were botched at the time, could be revived. Shows that there is a sentiment at large shared by many actors that this war should end. I don't necessarily think Thursday meeting will end with anything consequential, but I think there's a general sentiment that war should end. And as long as the airspace ceasefire is concerned, it will ensure that energy supplies are secure. It will ensure that number of actors which are not active participants of this confrontation will also have their interests secured and protected.
Orhan, thank you so much. Great analysis as always.
Pleasure's mine, Andy.
Well, staying with energy, credit ratings agency Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's investment-grade credit rating, giving it a stable outlook and maintaining the rating the company first secured in 2025. The decision comes despite global economic uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and energy market volatility, reinforcing investor confidence and strengthening SOCAR's position in international capital markets.
We are pleased that Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's Baa3 long-term issuer rating with a stable outlook, confirming the company's investment-grade credit profile maintained since its initial upgrade last year. The decision provides further evidence of SOCAR's financial resilience, solid credit profile, and strong standing as a reliable partner in international capital markets. It also reflects international recognition of the company's long-term financial discipline, prudent financial policy, and the measures implemented to support sustainable development.
Turkey says the United States has approved the export of engines for its homegrown Khan fighter jet, a move that could signal a thaw in defense relations between the two NATO allies after years of tensions. Washington, however, has yet to publicly confirm the decision. Adam Morrow has more on that in Istanbul.
Turkey says the United States has approved the export of General Electric F-110 engines for serial production of its domestically produced Khan fifth-generation fighter jet. If confirmed, the move could mark a significant step in improving defense ties between the two NATO allies. The announcement was made over the weekend by Turkish aerospace CEO Mehmet Demirolu at the Farnborough International Air Show in the United Kingdom. Demirolu said Washington had cleared the export of the U.S.-made engines following a review process, removing a key obstacle that had clouded the future of Turkey's flagship combat aircraft program. U.S. authorities, however, have yet to verify the approval, and neither the State Department nor the Pentagon has issued an official statement. But if confirmed, the decision would be one of the clearest signs yet that defense cooperation between Washington and Ankara is beginning to thaw after years of friction. Relations deteriorated in 2019 when Turkey purchased the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, despite repeated objections from the United States. Washington responded by imposing sanctions on Turkey's defense procurement agency and expelling Ankara from a U.S.-led multinational F-35 fighter jet program. U.S. officials argue that operating the S-400 alongside the F-35 could compromise the aircraft's sensitive technology. Although the sanctions remain in place, bilateral defense ties have shown signs of improvement in recent months. Washington has approved the sale of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey, while President Donald Trump has signaled his willingness to readmit Turkey to the F-35 program if outstanding issues involving the S-400 are resolved. If confirmed by Washington, the reported engine approval would mark another milestone in what appears to be a slow but steady reset of U.S.-Turkey defense ties. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Okay, after the break, Russia tightens its grip on migrant workers with new financial requirements for those allowed to stay. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Russia has tightened its migration policy yet again, introducing new financial requirements and stricter regulations for foreign workers. The measures are expected to affect around 6 million foreign nationals, the majority of whom are labor migrants from Central Asia. Sevil Rajapova has more on that in Tashkent.
Foreign workers living in Russia will now have to show they earn enough to support themselves and their dependent family members at or above the regional subsistence minimum. This is a new law from President Vladimir Putin for labor migrants. Authorities will verify the income through tax and employment records. The legislation also requires foreign workers to make advance tax payments for themselves and their minor children when applying for work permits, with non-compliance potentially resulting in payment cancellation and the requirement to leave the country within 15 days. A separate law also increases state fees for application for Russian citizenship, temporary and permanent residency, while employers will pay higher fees to hire foreign workers. The latest measures are expected to affect around 6 million foreign nationals currently living in Russia, most of them labor migrants from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, who together account for overwhelming majority of Russia's migrant workforce. The legislation follows a series of charter migration rules introduced over the past 2 years. Earlier this month, Russia made pre-registration through the Rule ID mobile application, which is mandatory for citizens of visa-free countries entering for work or other temporary purposes, including those from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Travelers now must submit their details electronically before arrival and obtain a QR code to enter the country. Despite the tighter controls, migrant workers remain vital to sectors including construction, transport, logistics and public services, while Russia continues to face persistent labor shortages. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Afghanistan and Uzbekistan have reaffirmed their commitment to expanding economic cooperation after Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister Jamshid Hojayev led a senior delegation for talks in Kabul. Tamim Bahiz reports.
Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister Jamshid Hojayev and a high-level delegation met with Prime Minister Mohammad Hassan at the Presidential Palace in Kabul. They discussed ways to deepen cooperation across a range of sectors. According to the Prime Minister's office, Hojayev described Afghanistan as an important partner in Uzbekistan's foreign policy and said that delegation's visit was made on the instruction of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. He said Uzbek exports to Afghanistan reached $150 million last year, while exports have already totaled $111 million in the first 4 months of the current solar year, expressing confidence that bilateral trade will continue to grow. The Uzbek Deputy Prime Minister also announced that 5,000 visas have been issued to Afghan citizens this year, with further steps underway to simplify visa procedures. Meanwhile, in separate talks, Afghanistan's Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation and his Uzbek counterpart agreed to launch the practical work of a joint technical team to improve transport links, facilitate transit and ease visa procedures for commercial drivers. Uzbekistan also pledged greater access for Afghan transit vehicles. Also, discussions with national companies and the National Development Company focused on expanding trade and investment, increasing exports of Afghan fresh fruits, advancing the Trans-Afghan project, strengthening textile industry, and supporting infrastructure development. Uzbekistan also announced plans to purchase 100,000 tons of Afghan cotton and cooperate in supplying fertilizers, improved seeds, and other agricultural support. The meeting highlighted growing economic ties between Kabul and Tashkent, with both sides pledging to strengthen trade, connectivity, and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
Azerbaijan has officially launched preparations to host the inaugural FIFA Under-15 World Cup and Festival this year. FIFA's Council Bureau selected Azerbaijan to host the first ever edition of the tournament, which will take place from October 22nd to 31st. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev signed a decree outlining the measures needed to organize the tournament. assigning the existing committee for the 2027 FIFA Under-20 World Cup to oversee preparations for the new event. The event marks a new addition to FIFA's youth competitions and is expected to bring together some of the world's most promising young footballers. In Georgia's Kutaisi, the country's former parliament building has been given a new life. It now houses a technology hub, opened this week by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Economy. Nini Nikolashvili has more on that from Tbilisi.
Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze and Economy Minister Mariam Krivishvili cut the ribbon on the new technology hub in Kutaisi, set fittingly inside the building that once held Georgia's parliament. Old walls, new purpose. Inside, an AI computing center, a science and technology museum, and a branch of TUMO, the creative tech education network already running in more than 20 countries. There is also a technopark, Georgia's largest, built to run incubators, hackathons, and training programs non-stop all year. Economy Minister Krivishvili framed it as a statement of intent. Georgia, she said, doesn't just want to use new technology, it wants to build it. And Kutaisi, she argued, has already earned the spot: a working international airport, a young university, and now this. It is a local story, but it lands against a much bigger backdrop. Separately, Georgia has spent years chasing a bigger ambition, turning itself into a digital hub linking Europe and Asia with plans for submarine data cables tying the two continents together. The Kutaisi hub is not formally part of that connectivity push, but both point in the same direction. A country betting that geography plus a bit of infrastructure adds up to relevance. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
One more story before we go. Government officials and experts from across the Islamic world have gathered in Azerbaijan to discuss the challenges and opportunities of the years ahead. Rukaya Bashamak reports from the ICESCO regional office in Baku.
There is a lot happening here at the ICESCO event in Baku, Azerbaijan. Today, we are here at the regional office in Baku, where high-level government officials, experts, and representatives from countries across the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia have gathered to discuss how countries can better prepare for the future. The event is jointly organized by the ICESCO regional office in Baku and the ICESCO Center for Foresight and Artificial Intelligence in partnership with Prince Mohammed bin Fahd University. With the world going through profound changes, particularly with the noticeably rapid development of artificial intelligence, countries across the Islamic world are facing new economic, geopolitical, and environmental challenges and opportunities, making the ability to anticipate change and prepare for the possible future scenarios very important before they actually happen. Today specifically mark the official launch for the ICESCO Strategic Foresight Guide, a practical guide designed to help countries think more systematically about the future, identify emerging trends and challenges, and prepare for them while strengthening cooperation between member states. We have also had the opportunity to speak with some of the delegates and countries' representatives and hear their perspectives on the subject matter.
Today, through ICESCO's regional office, we are launching this initiative. From Baku, we will establish the Strategic Foresight Focal Points Network, bringing together representatives from across the Islamic world in cooperation with ICESCO. The organization has entrusted both its headquarters and its regional office in Baku with leading this network and helping to advance strategic foresight across its member states.
I think it's important because we are living in a context of great uncertainty these days, and therefore having the commitment of countries to experiment this kind of tools, methodologies, and so on. It's very promising because we need to have fresh ideas on how we can overcome crises, how we can envision more sustainable, resilient future.
So this is just the first day of the event. We will be following with the discussions here in Baku with more from the second and last day tomorrow. So for A News, this was Ruqayya Bashammah.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to A News.